Hello. Okay, so I want to review the KOSA bill and COPPA 2.0 because both of them have been somewhat worrying. And I also want to clear up any misconceptions. I will be reviewing the bill's one-pager, so I will not be reviewing the full bill, mainly because the full 2023 bill is not released. The 2022 was released recently, as far as I understand. But I'm not sure how I feel about the fact that information is not public. But we'll get into the KOSA bill, COPPA 2.0. Let's clarify some things that I looked into. One thing that people were worried about. There's a lot of misinformation being spread about the bill, and because I'm covering the actual bill's one-pager, you're going to see where a lot of that isn't true. I looked at some websites to look for more information on the specific subject, but I was not able to find anything that suggested that the government was going to be using government IDs to make you sign into websites. I couldn't find anything like that. I am curious how they're going to go about age verification, but there's not in that's a possibility, but I highly doubt that, because the senators who are helping pass this bill still use the internet, and they probably don't want to use their government ID. You also have to think about personal convenience on the senator's part. With that in mind, let's continue into looking into the actual bill. First, we're going to start with the KOSA 2023 bill here. I'm going to, read it, and I'm going to tell y'all my thoughts on it, and I'm just going to be reading the whole bill, the background, summary, and endorsements. It's about a page, but it's going to take a little bit to cover the information because it's summarized. On the background, as congressional hearings, media reports, academic research, and heartbreaking stories from families have repeatedly shown, online platforms can have a harmful effect on children and teens, fostering body image issues, creating addictive use, promoting products that are dangerous for young audiences, and fueling bullying and other destructive behaviors. So looking into that one issue, that is something I do think needs to be clarified. There have been, and I've seen the specific cases they're using to push the KOSA bill. A lot have to do with something that I saw that was being called a sextortion. If you don't know what that is, it's basically a scammer who kind of coerces inappropriate images from people who, are still living with their parents, people who are young, minors, but usually in their late teens, which is an important distinction in this specific case. And then in a lot of these cases, they'll be like, hey, we need this money, right? They'll ask for money that, they'll usually ask for, what I've seen, the only money I've seen was like $1,000, still a lot, especially for a kid. And in some of these cases, these kids can't pay up, and the threat is that they'll release that information to their parents, family members, and just generally online. So in some unfortunate cases, and actually a unfortunately high number of these cases, people commit suicide to get out of it. With that in mind, those are heartbreaking cases, and I do think that obviously we need to be preventing those cases. I think that's an obvious problem. However, one thing that should be made incredibly important is the fact that the KOSA bill does exclude every example that I know of sextortion. Most people were in their late teens. A specific example that comes to mind, they were nearing 20. And the KOSA bill only goes to people of the age of 13, as we'll get into in a moment. I just think that's an important thing we need to talk about. I do think there are issues with all that, but the heartbreaking stories part from families and stuff, it's interesting to think about that because a lot of these issues they're bringing up, body image issues, addictive use, promoting products that are dangerous for young audiences. Those are all obvious, but body image issues and those scammer stories and stuff, all those stories mainly affect people who are not going to be included into the age range that the bill is included in. So I think that's an important distinction. Moving on to the next paragraph. The Kids Online Safety Act provides the kids and parents with tools, safeguards, and transparency they need to protect against threats and children's health and well-being online. The legislation will require the online platforms put the interest of children first, providing an environment that is safe by default. The Kids Online Safety Act also ensures that parents and policymakers know whether online platforms are taking meaningful steps to address risks to kids by requiring independent audits and supporting public scrutiny from experts and academic researchers. The Kids Online Safety Act of 2023 builds on its version of the 107th Congress by clarifying key definitions and rules to better focus on urgent harms to kids. That just tells you what the bill's going to do. We're going to get to all that in a moment, but since it's on the one pager, I felt it was necessary for everyone to be informed on it. Now, moving on to the summary. Providing parents and kids safeguards and tools to protect kids' experiences online. that's just the main area, and we're moving on to one of the bullet points. Require social media platforms to provide minors with options to protect their information, disable addictive product features, and opt out of personalized algorithmic recommendations. Platforms are required to enable the strongest setting by default. There's a lot to unpack here. We're going to start with, obviously, the first one, disable addictive product features. I agree with this. However, I think that we need to allow everyone to have that. I think that's a rule that should apply to everyone. Why are we giving this right to only minors and not to everyone else? Because it's an addictive product feature. We don't want audiences to be addicted to things. You should allow them to turn that off. But it's also not clarifying what addictive product features really are. What I can assume is there are obviously content that is, at least I can deem myself, addictive. But there are a lot of the corporations that use that in general. Like if we talk about TikTok, short form content that's meant to bring in your attention through the entirety of it, right? And meant to keep you going. So with that in mind, that's addictive, I would argue. I know people who are addicted to TikTok, to some degree, right? I think that's something that should be provided to everyone, and I do think it's an issue. But the other issue is trying to clarify what is that going to mean for a lot of these social media platforms, like TikTok, whose entire purpose is addictive product features. The other issue as well is that the content that's considered addictive, although the website sets up the UI and basically is begging for this content to be given out, nonetheless, it didn't necessarily create that content. The content that, or the addictive product features they're talking about, seem to, in my understanding, seem to pertain to things made by the community. However, I will say that TikTok, for example, does promote that with their, just in their general style, but also through the algorithm. Opt out of personalized algorithm recommendations. Everyone should have that. I think everyone should also have that. Protect their options to protect their information. I think everyone should have that. Platforms are required to enable the strongest setting by default. That one was very controversial because, in my personal opinion, there are a lot of parents who first off don't know how to use the internet, but also don't really care about their child enough to turn a lot of that off. And with that in mind, when you have the strongest setting enabled, there are lots of kids who just have parents that are not going to be willing to turn that off and not really know what their kid is consuming, right? I think it's better to have those product features and have parents turn them on themselves, or at least maybe a full UI over a browser that says, I want the strongest settings on every single page. I'm sure there's an extension, or even just the website themselves could offer that. I think that's a much better decision, considering that would allow parents who actually care about their kids to genuinely restrict it. But at the same time, I understand the argument behind that, because I don't know whether or not you want kids who are being neglected by their family to have full access to the internet or no access to the internet. However, I do think it is, as we'll get into in a moment, there's a lot of information that may be taken away that might be incredibly important to these people. Moving on. Creating accountability for online platforms harms to kids. Creates a duty for online platforms to prevent and mitigate specific dangers to minors, including promotion of suicide, eating disorder, substance abuse, sexual exploitation, advertisements for certain illegal products, and other matters. I think that, obviously, they should just stop advertising tobacco and alcohol, or, but at the same time, I understand why it's only on for minors. So actually, now I'm thinking about it, yeah, makes sense. That one makes sense, just generally right. However, the thing about dangers to minors with promotion of suicide, eating disorder, substance abuse, SE, all that is stuff that, as far as I understand, many platforms are already doing their thing to prevent that. I think TikTok is really the biggest issue. I know plenty of people, I'm fairly young, I know plenty of people who constantly, I wouldn't say endorse, but talk about their mental health issues nonstop, to the point where it's like really annoying, because it's almost like they're using it to get attention. I think that's a big issue, and I do think TikTok should be doing more. I think TikTok's the biggest one that maybe the Kids Online Safety Act is actually aiming at, because platforms like YouTube have already taken plenty of steps. You're not going to find many videos on YouTube that are telling you to kill yourself, or a lot of videos on YouTube telling you to do drugs, or a lot of videos on YouTube that are going to be telling you to, stop eating as much, kind of thing, right? Because YouTube's good about keeping that content away. Actually, a little bit too good is one of the biggest complaints. But at the same time, TikTok is not. And I think TikTok has failed in their responsibility and could have easily prevented the following bills from being passed because of the fact that they haven't dealt with this sooner. I know people who have seen gore videos through TikTok just because it popped up on their algorithm. Like the Ronnie situation was a horrible one, where people were just seeing that video everywhere. With that in mind, I don't think videos like that and should be allowed on the website at all. But at the same time, it's also difficult for TikTok to, take care of all that content, considering how much content is pumped out on their website constantly. TikTok is not only one of the biggest social media platforms, but the other issue as well is that their social media platform, dealing with short form content, means that oftentimes for every one YouTube video, there's about 10 in just time length. But in reality, there's probably even more, considering TikToks are much easier to put together than a YouTube video. There are plenty of TikTok pages that put out multiple TikToks a day, but most YouTube channels take weeks to put out a single video. I think that's an important distinction. Now, we're going to move on. Okay. The next bullet point requires large social media platforms to perform annual independent audit and assess risks to minors, their compliance with the act, and whether their platform is taking meaningful steps to prevent those harms. What I don't like about this is it kind of assumes that America is at the center of all of this. It's asking this global media conglomerate to say, hey, this is what we're doing to follow this specific country. And I do find that interesting. I don't support corporations, but my issue is the fact that these corporations will have no trouble following all these restrictions, but the people who are going to be in trouble are the people whose careers they've made their careers online. Small or large creators that are maybe aimed more at adult audiences are definitely screwed in this specific regard, because once again, one worrying part is the fact that YouTube may just, and already has, taken a lot of steps to make it difficult to talk about, even if you're trying to prevent eating disorder or substance abuse. At this moment, as far as I understand, you're not allowed to say the actual word for SA. I think that's a big problem. But I think this KOSA bill is only going to help make that worse of a problem. YouTube's only now, as far as I understand, actually getting better about that. I've seen content get more and more grotesque a little bit. But I also think that YouTube's, and just generally, social media's comedy side is going to be hit horrifically. A lot of comedy is dark because that's what's funny. It's surprising. And, even in a lot of these cases, it's not even that crazy dark to be restricted by the bill. And obviously, I don't think the bill's aiming for comedy. What it's aiming for is generally, asking for a lot of that. But the issue is context. Will a corporation, which is just trying to save its business from this random bill, is it going to make sure that they're sticking out for the context of something? Or is it going to be easier for them to ask their algorithm to just remove anything that references or talks about these issues? I think that the second option is most likely. Now, on the last bit. Opening up black box algorithms provides academic and nonprofit organizations with access to critical data sets and online platforms to foster research regarding harm and safety to well-being to minors. From what I understand, it's not clear, because this isn't the actual bill. I mean, because it's a one-pager. It's a one-pager. It doesn't have enough space to make it clear what that means and what that information actually entails. If it's algorithm, information, there has been issues with that in the past, mainly because, once again, that's going to be an issue that's not going to hurt YouTube as a business. It's going to hurt the people who use YouTube as a platform, or are trying to, because if people understand how the algorithm works, especially even just a select group, then they can easily make their videos go viral and make their videos perform better, because it's all about, performing for the algorithm. On the endorsements page is where I think things start to get a little icky. The Kids Online Safety Act has been endorsed by organizations and associations representing mental health experts, nurses, parents, groups, young people, consumer advocates, faith groups, tech experts, and other communities, including Common Sense Media, American Psychological Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Compass, Eating Disorder Coalition, Fair Play, Mental Health America, and Digital Progress Institute. Now, if you go to stopkosa.com, you'll notice that the information goes against this endorsements page because of the fact that the endorsements page lists all these endorsements. However, there are 90 plus, according to the Stop KOSA website, organizations that have signed against the bill. And with that in mind, a lot of the people they're saying aren't trustworthy endorsements or specific endorsements, like nurses, parents, young people. Those are not educated groups. I understand why you would say, Common Sense Media, American Psychological Association, like those are trusted areas. faith groups, tech experts, and consumer advocates are not specific enough for them to be used in the endorsements area, in my personal opinion. I understand them being an endorsement. However, I feel like it is obviously, and I think obviously what it's actually doing is it's just trying to beef this up, because it obviously doesn't talk about the Carney argument, because the bill has actually been tried to be passed kind of behind bars a little bit. The next bill we're going to take a look at is a bill that's being pushed alongside KOSA, which is COPPA 2.0. With this in mind, it's written by Common Sense, so that's definitely going to matter, because when we review the one-pager, you'll see that Common Sense Media is very unprofessional, which is not surprising if you know anything about Common Sense Media. So we'll read it paragraph by paragraph. The first paragraph is, what does the Children and Teens Online Privacy Protection Act do? It says COPPA 2 amends the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act of 1998 to strengthen protections related to the online collection, use, the disclosure of personal information of children and minors up to age 16. One thing that needs to be noted is, we'll talk about it later, but previously it was the age of 13. It says that in a later paragraph, but they're raising it by 3 years. We'll talk about what that actually means. How are children and teens uniquely vulnerable? Young people go through developmental stages and cannot critically assess what they see online until they are much older, making it easy for businesses to exploit these developmental vulnerabilities. Research suggests that over 75% of 8 to 11-year-olds cannot distinguish ads from other content, and less than half of 12 to 15-year-olds understand search results are paid for. Even if identified as an ad, they are much more likely to accept advertisements as truthful, accurate, and unbiased. That's an interesting area, because I think that's an issue with education, and less to do with a issue of developmental issues. I think that kids need to be taught how to distinguish between ads online, especially considering the vitalness of online. But as we can, there's another solution in the bill, but I do think that, for example, I didn't realize that search results were promoted by corporations until I was just told. And then when I was told that makes sense, right? Because I just didn't notice it. So I think that's important. I also, obviously, I think most kids would just, an important message that they'll just have to know when they get older is the fact that not everything they hear online is true. They'll have to understand what's trusted, what's not, and if you don't know if it's trusted, how to verify if it is, that kind of thing. We're going to move on to the next paragraph. Children and teens are also prone to oversharing without understanding the consequences of their sharing. They believe that their information they share remains on their devices or within an app or game, and then that deleting that information on their device or within the app will delete it from the internet. They also do not understand that an app may gather information on them from sources outside the app. Most teens mistakenly believe that they can easily delete information online. That is a true problem. That's an issue that they've tried to talk to us about, that even to this day I have trouble kind of accepting a little bit. Because I think that with the digital footprint thing, for example, the issue with the digital footprint that they haven't made it clear, is that the fact that, a lot of information can be erased from public eyes, but private eyes, they'll always see it. And the other thing as well is that not always, because if something gets popular enough in the public, it'll stay there. People have tried to get rid of things in the past before, and that's not how that works, right? So I agree with this. I genuinely just agree with that paragraph in regards to kids and teens not really understanding. However, I will say there is a lack of statistics, but also because I think that the one-pager wastes a lot of space in their lack of summaries. Why do we need an update to the existing law? Currently, COPPA is over 2 decades old. I'm just going to stop right there. The age of a bill, and this is important, this goes universally. The age of a bill does not matter in the bill's actual strength. There are a bunch of bills that have been in for hundreds of years, and we have no plan of getting rid of them because some bills are just simple. I understand why they're bringing this up, considering the internet has changed a lot. However, just the distinction of 2 decades in most scenarios would not matter, and I think that's important. This also does show a little bit of unprofessionalism, because even if you were promoting the bill, even if the bill has become outdated, you would not use the age of it as evidence of that. You would use the actual bill as evidence of that. So that's a warning sign for what's to come, and applies to only children under the age of 13. This leaves a whole group of teens vulnerable to third-party trackers and apps that have been known to seek more data, especially from teens. COPPA 2.0 empowers teens to make decisions for themselves by recognizing their growing anatomy and asking consent before data collection. Here's something else. I think that this should be made universal. I think everyone should be asked, hey, can we track you? That's been something that people have been buying products like VPNs to prevent for so long. This could be something that actually helps people. Once again, there's been, the amount of times you probably heard "take back your privacy" in the last few years have likely been obscene, because privacy has become less and less, I wouldn't say normal, but they've been taking more and more, and there's not a lot of options unpaid to do that. And if the bill were to pass that, I think that would be awesome, right? I think that'd be great. So once again, I just have an issue with the fact that that's not just universal, and why that's only made for people up to the age of 16. Now, with that in mind, while also strengthening special protections for younger children by flatly prohibiting behavioral and targeted marketing. I think they're talking about people below the age of 13 or something. They don't clarify the age, which is also a big problem. Once again, it shows that COPPA 2.0 was written by common sense. I also want you to understand that the top of the page is fact sheet, when there's a lot of emotional data in this. Existing law only allows for sites and apps to turn... Existing law also allows for sites and apps to turn a blind eye for young people using their services, and has enabled bad actors to claim that they do not have strictly defined actual knowledge. The bad actors part also shows how unprofessional it is. That should not be in a bill. I think that's pretty simple, because it's obviously very emotional. When you're literally giving your opinion on actors in a bill about protecting children's safety, in any bill, that's not something that you should be doing. Of underage users. Yeah, we're starting, by the way. Of underage users. Even though they tell marketers that they can reach children, COPPA 2.0 would offer protections for children if sites and apps reasonably know children or minors are on their sites or app, such as they profile users by age. This is interesting. This is where I think the issue of verifying the age of users actually comes in. That information is already known about you. If you make a Google search that involves your age, it will take that into account and actually group that information with you as a profile to better advertise to you. That's how they're going to verify it. That's likely how they're going to verify it, instead of this other way, which means they're going to know your age. If you're worried about people or online people knowing your age, you're in a bit of an issue right now, because what this means is that no longer are you going to be verified by age by checkmark, which is a good thing in some cases, but a bad thing in a lot of cases, because in this case it means that people who, want to get around those restrictions and would be perfectly fine getting around those restrictions, cannot anymore. As a younger person who was on the internet a few years ago, getting around those restrictions when it was easy was great. I was able to learn so much that was incredibly important to me, and stuff that has made me do what I do now. And I think that without that, I wouldn't be the person I am. And with that in mind, I think that in some cases, we're now preventing certain cases from developing that kind of interest in a lot of stuff. I don't know. I'm kind of worried what this will do, considering it's going to likely be very, very, very accurate. In that regard, I recommend that everyone... there's no even recommendations. Just from now on, don't be looking up anything with your age in it. But even if you were beforehand, you're screwed. So, I guess just get older before this passes. With that in mind, on the final paragraph. Finally, COPPA 2.0 will enhance enforcement by establishing a Youth Privacy and Marketing Division of Federal Trade Commission. This division will access emerging concerns related to youth privacy and marketing practices. This is a big issue to me, because they're opening a new branch that's going to get a lot of funding, right? When in reality, there are a bunch of programs that were made to protect children in ways that I think are way more important, and which they just haven't. The Child Protective Services are horrifically underfunded, or have horrifically low employment rates, which is why so little actually comes from Child Protective Services. There are so many people who would way, way, way more benefit from Child Protective Services being a stronger division than people with a marketing division. I can promise you there are higher suicides and higher rates of mental illness caused by bad home life than the internet. The internet is a problem, but I don't think it's as large as just generally child abuse. Child abuse is much more widespread. I literally went on vacation last week and saw 2 instances of people hitting their children in a week, right? With that in mind, that's not good, right? And it's a much bigger issue, I think. And I think that they should... I don't care if they open this division, but if they're going to, they should at least be properly funding the division that's doing way more than this division ever will. With that in mind, there's something that the bill doesn't cover, and I think that's important to disclose. The KOSA bill leaves out in the one-pager a very important distinction. If we look at the Kids Online Safety Act on wikipedia.com, okay, we can see that one thing is the requirement applies to covered platforms, which are applications or services that connect to the internet and are likely to be used by minors. However, the bill exempts internet service providers, email services, educational institutions, and other specified entities from their requirements. This is a big issue because the government is also really bad at showing proper information. Educational institutions have actually been the source of the most vulgar material I've been showed, and all without my consent as well. I was showed pictures of mutilated genitalia by my school so that I wouldn't have sex at a young age. This was shown to everyone, by the way. This wasn't a specific thing done to me. But with that in mind, that's bad, right? I mean, they didn't give us any information on safe sex. They just kind of traumatized us, or at least tried. And I don't like that. You're basically taking one of the biggest sources for not only false, biased, and uneducated information, but vulgar information, and just leaving them out of the bill. And I understand why you do that, but I also have a big problem with it because it says educational institutions, which is not just the government. That's leaving corporations out that also provide very biased information, like universities. Believe it or not, a lot of universities post a very biased data. Another issue that people have brought up is the fact I'm reading now in the criticism area that don't delete that this could actually hit internet history pretty hard. I mean, of course, we always have the Wayback Machine, but we may not always have that. And the other issue as well is that it's just good to have all information preserved on the original place it was at. This is all very important. The internet is a very new place, and this is a very, very, very vital area in, I would argue, history, because this is the first time where people have the ability to communicate with one another and the freedom to do that as much as they please. And that's what I'm worried about the KOSA bill in that regard as well. With that in mind, is it going to pass? Do we think it's going to pass? Right now, the KOSA bill has passed the Senate's commission, but hasn't passed the actual Senate. Last year, in 2022, it, as far as I understand, did not pass the 2022 commission. With that in mind, I do think it's important to note that I don't think that this bill will do any good. I think it's poorly structured. They have not talked about the issues at all. And yeah, look, the Committee of Commerce, Science, and Transportation ordered to be reported with an amendment in the nature of a substitute favorably. If you don't know what the fuck that means, which I don't blame you, it basically just means that the Kids Online Safety Act passed the commission, but not the Senate. With that in mind, there's a lot of stuff that's incredibly risky, and a lot of stuff that and it also seems that the Senate has no idea. There's a lot of false information being spread, for example, on the endorsements page. But if you go to the Twitter of a lot of these senators, they're also spreading false information there as well. One area of false information that people have been spreading, or not people, but senators have been spreading, is the idea that they're reeling in big tech. They like to say it like they're attacking corporations, when in reality, they're helping corporations. They're giving corporations an excuse to destroy the adult side of their platforms. And that's not going to hit them as bad as it's just going to hit the people whose jobs it is to run those sides of the platform. Because, if you don't know, the kids side of a platform like YouTube is the same side that's, it's their biggest side by far. Like Mr. Beast, Coco Melon, the Skibbity, even the fucking Gmod Skibbity toilet guy. That guy's got like making boatloads of money right now. Because that's the biggest side of YouTube, and it may always be. I do have a feeling that those younger audiences will move to the more adult side in just a few years. However, I think it's still important to note that that distinction. They're not reeling in big tech by doing this. Most big tech companies are actually going to be perfectly preserved by this law, and in fact will be perfectly intact after this. YouTube is just a branch of Google, and YouTube, and a much smaller branch of YouTube, is the adult section. They could cut that and it wouldn't be that much of a deal. And in fact, it would actually probably help them in regard to getting more advertisers for the kids side of the YouTube, of the kids side of YouTube. Right? So I'm getting tired now. So I will say it's worrying. Okay, so I was wrong about something. The identification thing is real, apparently. It's just not being passed by the KOSA bill. Basically, the Social Media Child Protection Act is also something that people should be incredibly worried about. This is the main thing I think everyone needs to be worried about. KOSA, COPPA 2.0, once again, very worrying bills. But what people really need to be worried about is this bill, the Social Media Child Protection Act. This bill, hold on, if I type it in to the online sections, hopefully I can find a one-pager. Makes it unlawful for social media platforms to provide access to children under the age of 16. It also makes social media platforms responsible to verify age using methods like ID verification. I still can't find any information on it. It seems that it was just introduced and it failed. But may not permit a child access to social media platforms. This is something that everyone should be much more worried about. It seems to have not passed. However, it was introduced in 2/10/2023, and there is no information on whether or not that's actually passed or where it is in the system. It's possible that it just hasn't moved and that it has been approved somewhere. It's just been introduced, so I think that it's going to be wrapped up in another congressional hearing likely, or another hearing from the Senate, or a much lower area of the Senate, like those commissions. However, this is much more worrying than KOSA and COPPA 2.0 because it would require you to have a government ID. Once again, all of these acts are passing together because they all have different things they're applying. In a specific case, this one would require the ID for verification. The KOSA bill would require all that other like extra tools for parents. And then you have the COPPA 2.0 bill, which would require certain information and personalized ads to be taken away from 16-year-olds. If you can see, it builds up. And I mean, the ID one is definitely the worst one, but KOSA and COPPA 2.0 also build upon that structure that this bill seems to be trying to push. With that in mind, I think that's really all the information that you probably need at the moment. I know it's a little bit messy because of the fact that I came across one of the pieces of information much later. I didn't expect to find the Real ID Act in here. With that in mind, that's a very bad bill. Everyone should be aware of these bills, and obviously, if you hear anything about any of these bills making it any further, if you disagree with what was said in the bill, or are worried about the bill whatsoever, you should definitely attempt to protest it. There are a bunch of ways. If you go to stopkosa.com, I've heard that there's a bunch of resources there. You should just email your senators, protest, whatever needs to be done. In a specific case, I feel like I'm doing my part in educating people on what the bills are, but I will also take steps further than that if any progress is made on any of these bills. I'm currently working on trying to figure out something I can do to help stop KOSA from passing, and for sure there's fucking Real ID shit. The KOSA, COPPA 2.0 are once again are icky, but not definitely bad. The ID one is definitely bad. There is nothing about the ID one that makes any sense to me, and that I agree with. With that in mind, I want to say thank you all. Have a great day, and I also want to say, if you agreed with anything I said, if you disagree with anything I said, any opinions I expressed, please let me know. This is a safe space for everyone. And also, I want to say, just, if you subscribe and like, that would hopefully make it so that I could do this in the future. I want to be able to do this as a full-time thing, and your subscription would genuinely mean gold to me. And, just, be supportive with smaller channels and stuff, or just other channels. I would greatly appreciate it. I genuinely would. I would also greatly appreciate people just expressing their opinions. That's what I want this to be. I don't want this to just be me telling you what I think. I want this to be not a linear argument. I want this to be much more open. This is an open argument. Although this one's not as much of an argument as much as it is just informing people. Other videos I plan coming out are definitely more argumentative. I'll have a channel trailer probably up right after this, maybe the same day. With that in mind, thank you all. Have a great day. See y'all.